The hollowing wind blew the large snowflakes all over the ground. They would lift and swirl after touching down. Visibility was not very good. You couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead of yourself if you tried. Normally a snowstorm was pretty harmless unless you were Bill, who was busy walking down the center of the street. Bill looked at the ground only because when he lifted his head, his face was badly battered by the storm. He could feel his cheeks slowly going numb as the wind changed against his favor. The only factor saving him was the fact that it was the middle of the day. He could at least still see the silhouettes of large structures if they appeared. Unfortunately, it was quite the rural area and they were far and few between. Bill let out a long sigh, as if his hunger wasn't enough pain for him to endure. Bill decided to focus on something else. He began to rely on his senses to distract him. He listened to all the noise surrounding him, including the noises he made as he walked. The crunch of snow underneath his feet almost felt therapeutic. There was a tempo about it, which reminded Bill of happier times, times with music and that beautiful tempo mentioned before that came with it. The only other noise Bill could hear was the sound of the chain hanging from his bag. That chain had come in handy before. It was reliable as a close-range weapon when Bill needed it the most. Although getting close to the threat wasn't really the best option with his most common adversary. A simple bite from one of those freaks would then turn him into one himself. After seeing the destruction they brought, Bill would never allow it. He could have sworn that he heard a bottle of pills in his bag at that moment. Those pills were for worst case scenario. Bill didn't like to think about that much. Bill brought his eyes up just to see if anything was nearby. The snow stuck to his face, almost instantaneously turning into ice. The pain was manageable, but the thought of shelter sounded more than pleasant. As he scanned his surroundings, he came to the realization that he was on the outside of what appeared to be a town. There were brick buildings all in a line, each one more than likely some small-time business that had been open for years and years. Bill walked over to the closest one. The shop window was almost completely iced over as Bill leaned in for a look. The lack of power rendered the shop completely dark and ominous. It looked as if old trinkets and shelving units were displayed endlessly inside, but it was hard to see what everything was exactly. Bill looked over to the front door and saw that a metal shutter blocked it off. There was no chance of Bill getting in that way, but what looked to be an alleyway ran alongside the building. Maybe there was a back entrance, Bill thought to himself as he cautiously moved forward. Alleyways weren't exactly great locations, especially from a tactical angle. Only two ends. Bill ran as quietly as he could. He needed a clear distance just in case any threat awaited him on the other side. He let the chain fall loosely but held it with both hands to minimize the sound. If anyone was to jump out, they would be greeted by a full-grown man running at decent speed with the chain already halfway to their face. Unless the threat was made of steel, it would more than likely buy Bill some time. He held his breath and braced as he reached the end. Luckily, as he came out into the open ever so slightly, nobody was waiting for him on the other side. Though he did stay still for a moment, just to make sure. He scanned the neighboring buildings and got familiar with them. Bill was always looking out for escape plans and open doors. If anything got hot on his trail, he could always buy himself valuable time by weaving in and out of objects before him. It wouldn't have been his first time, certainly not his last. After seeing a few options within a runnable distance, he turned his attention to the building he wanted into in the first place. Something about it being so secured made Bill feel as if maybe some supplies could have been left behind. If he got lucky, he might find something such as a can of food left in a break room or maybe a coat left on a coat rack. Unfortunately, washers and dryers were typically hard to come by in the times Bill was living in. If he could swap a dirty coat with something fresh, he certainly would in a heartbeat. Bill looked at the building thoroughly and he found his entry point right away. There was a ladder mechanism that led to a typical metal staircase that you see in every single movie. The ladder wasn't engaged, so Bill had to find a way around the problem. He began to look around, still making sure now and again that nobody was walking up silently behind him. While he scanned, he noticed a wooden sign had fallen off a building. Underneath, he could see something long and sturdy protruding out of the rubbish. It looked to be long enough to solve his problem with the ladder. He cautiously walked over and looked upon the pile. The long piece of wood was buried pretty heavily. Bill would have to make some noise to get it off. He had a here goes nothing moment and bent down, ready for anything that came his way. It was surprisingly heavier than Bill thought it would have been. He let out an audible grunt from the unpleasant surprise. But although heavy, Bill had enough in him to flip it over. He quickly tried to grab the majority of the wood so it would not hit the ground and create unnecessary noise. He got most of it, but to his despair, a lone metal piece decided to escape his grasp. Bill tensed as it let out a long, high-pitched sound. Sweat formed on his forehead immediately. He snapped his head in every direction, waiting to see his fate shambling his way. God forbid it was a run instead of a shamble. He felt like every shadow was a threat, looming within the many dark buildings. On top of that, it seemed like the snow was getting worse, as was the temperature. "Fuck this," Bill said, gritting his teeth. He bent down and grabbed the piece of wood, brandishing it like a spear. He spun on his heel and faced the ladder. He began to jog over it, and as he reached the ladder, his blood ran cold. Somewhere within at least 3 blocks, a loud, raspy screech echoed off every building. It was one of those monsters. They had heard Bill. The search was on. He was standing under the ladder and noticed that the wood was about a foot short. Bill looked for something to stand on immediately. He just needed that little boost. He set the wood down and walked back toward the debris. There was a milk crate outside one of the buildings. It was perfect for what he needed. He went to run for it, but his feet gave way. Ice was his demise. Bill went from looking at a milk crate to staring straight into the sky. His head had smacked a little, so he was slightly dazed, but the memory of the beast drawing close forced him back to his feet. Bill picked himself up. The snow on his bare skin burned from the cold, harsh wind. His head was pounding, but it would not compare to what he would feel if he didn't hurry. He grabbed the milk crate and turned back, carefully placing his feet where he saw no ice. Bill closed the distance fast and set the crate down. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. He felt as if something was nipping at his heels. He stepped upon the crate and reached for the stars. Bill weaved the wood under the first rung and in front of the second, creating some pull when he motioned downward. The first tug felt good and secure, but Bill noticed right away that the ladder was just not moving. He pulled again, this time looking upward at the ladder. When he pulled, a large chunk of ice came crashing down. It had come down so quick, Bill had no time to stop it from hitting him in the face. The blow had hit him so hard he was welcomed with immediate pain. It only further enforced his already pounding headache. The crate had slipped out and Bill lost his balance and fell violently. When he hit the concrete below, it felt as if an organ exploded in his body. Terrible pain found itself creeping up Bill's sides. The wind was taken from Bill, making him feel as if time was paused and he was stuck forever in pain. He rolled to his side, planting a firm hand in the snow. No matter how hard he tried, he had no strength to stand at the moment. But his wind was starting to slowly come back. As Bill gasped for the fresh air before him, he heard another terrible scream right in front of him.